Andrew here from the Revisionist Almanac. At the start of every month, I will spend a little bit of time giving you a window into what I watched over the previous month, both new and old, and share my thoughts on some of those films. Before we get into this, though, I would always appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel on whatever podcast platform you're currently using, as well as rating and reviewing the show. That goes a long way. In addition, you can find the show on every major social media platform, including Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, TikTok, Threads, and Letterboxd, using the handle RevAlmanac. With that out of the way, let's get into some of my October watches. Up first, we have Fantastic Four: First Steps. This is the 37th film in the MCU, and the second release this year after Thunderbolts just several months back. And after several unsuccessful attempts, would this be the first time Fantastic Four movie would actually be good or interesting? In short, yes. It's better than anything we've gotten so far from these characters on screen. So what did I like about the movie? The aesthetics. The future mixed with the retro. It was very comic book accurate. It felt totally different than everything else we've seen before in the MCU. I also thought the four main characters all had pretty good chemistry together, demonstrated both in the film and during the press tour and promotion. I also thought Ralph Ineson as Galactus was a very solid villain. I wasn't totally sure how well the character would come across on screen, but in total it worked for me. As far as what I didn't like about the movie, the general stakes of the film felt small, even with the idea of the world being at jeopardy. I think my continued superhero fatigue has just led me to be more cynical about the repetitive nature of these movies on a plot level. It felt like so much of the movie was just to get us to that mid-credit scene, which itself was put in place to just get us to Avengers Doomsday. Quite frankly, I am exhausted by the idea of these movies now being forced to have all this connective tissue, instead of the way it originally started out being much more organic in nature. As far as who would I recommend this movie to, obviously the diehard MCU fans, but people who have become disenchanted with the most recent phases post-Endgame might find themselves being won back over with this latest entry as Marvel continues to build to the next Avengers film. My score for Fantastic Four: First Steps is a decent 7 out of 10, which means Marvel is 2 for 2 in 2025 making good movies. Compared to recent years, I will take that. The next movie I watched was Eden, a new Ron Howard film. His third film of what's been a weird decade for him with 2020's Hillbilly Elegy and then 2022's 13 Lives. One movie was good, and the other movie gave us our very first taste of J.D. Vance. Not so good. Here we get a movie based around a true story of a group of people finding an island in the late 1920s that they looked to make a utopian place away from all the pain and the suffering that was happening in the world in the aftermath of World War I. As far as what I liked about Eden, I appreciated that this was something different from the director. If I watched this movie without knowing who made it, I could have possibly gotten 100 guesses, and I don't think I ever would have gotten to Ron Howard. This was also a movie that I think reminded me that Ana de Armas is a good actor when given material that highlights the things she does well. I know this is going to be a very controversial take, but I still think she was actually pretty good in Blonde, even if your mileage of that film quality probably varies. And I respect Ron Howard and, much more importantly, Jude Law for making sure 2025 is an equal opportunity place for men and women to be comfortable with full frontal nudity. In a movie with Ana de Armas and Sydney Sweeney, I'm not sure when I hit play I was expecting to get Jude Law hanging dong for long periods of time. As far as what didn't work in the film, the screenplay was pretty schlocky, which is fine, but it also kept the movie from being really good. Sydney Sweeney was also in another movie this year where she was playing sort of a plain Jane, the other being Americana, and she's also got another film, Christie, coming out later this year, where she's basically hiding her beauty. It's a really interesting decision to seemingly be seeking out roles to disguise her physical features. I guess to show she's got more than just a pretty face. Personally, I think she's shown acting talent. Just look at Reality from 2023. But I don't think she has to try so hard to mask being a naturally good-looking person and still be able to showcase her talent. As far as who would I recommend this movie to, if you have followed the career of Ron Howard to this point, there's no point stopping now. This is a departure from most of what he's done, and I appreciated it for that reason. I'm going to give a score of 6.8 out of 10 for Eden. The next movie I watched was The Conjuring Last Rites. We are indeed in spooky season. I had to get some Halloween stuff in there. This is another franchise closer, if we can be so lucky. Though when it comes to horror sequels that do well at the box office, regardless of the quality, the door is always going to be open for the studio to make more and milk the story for every last drop. What did I like about The Conjuring Last Rites? Well, watching Patrick Wilson continue to enjoy his moment in the sun. Since Insidious in 2010, he's been living it up as a horror fixture, and you can really tell he's having fun in these worlds. That's about all I've got for what I enjoyed about the movie. In terms of what didn't work, the story was as boring as watching paint dry. While your mileage may vary on any Conjuring movie, they all usually set a strong mood early and lean into what they are. This movie took way too long to get going, and once it did reach that point, it didn't go anywhere I cared to see where the end would be. The idea that we've turned the Warrens into supernatural superheroes that use the power of the Holy Spirit to fend off evil is downright preposterous at this point. Most of their work has been soundly debunked by now, and it's so hard for me to suspend disbelief with the ludicrous levels this franchise has now reached. As far as who would I recommend the movie to, really only the most hardcore horror fans out there that have to see this franchise to its conclusion. If you're new to the Conjuring universe, pick literally any other movie to start with. I'm going to give the film a 6.4 out of 10. Next up, we had The Toxic Avenger, a twisted superhero movie that breathes new life into a character we haven't seen on film since the mid-1980s. What I liked about the movie? Director Macon Blair very much understood the tone of the original, and he wisely leaned into the over-the-top violence and the campy nature of such an absurd character. All the actors I thought were hamming it up in playful ways that showed they were having a very fun time. Peter Dinklage lent his voice well to the Toxic Avenger. Luisa Guerrero did well as the Superformer playing the Toxic Avenger. And Elijah Wood and Kevin Bacon were both having a field day in their deranged roles. I also think the visual effects was strong considering it was made for less than $3.5 million. In terms of what really didn't work, it could have been trimmed down just a touch for more effectiveness. I'm not sure this story needed to exceed 100 minutes. I also didn't like that it took this film so long for a distributor to finally pick up the project. For those that don't know, The Toxic Avenger was made in late 2021. It premiered at Fantastic Fest back in 2023, and then it sat around for another 2 years before it was finally able to be seen either in the theater or on digital platforms. So who would I recommend The Toxic Avenger to? Those that yearn for the weird, the gore-filled, the over-the-top campy fun of the 1980s will have a good time with this movie. I'm going to give it a 6.8 out of 10. Up next, we have the film Him. This is a football-themed horror movie from director Justin Tipping, and it's produced by Jordan Peele. Though that appears to have confused many film fans who were tricked by the marketing using Peele's name in a way that they thought meant he was actually behind the camera. As far as what I liked, the movie was aesthetically pleasing and it had some cool moments of both heightened reality and discomfort at certain scenarios where characters would find themselves ending up in. I also really like that Marlon Wayans got to show that he's more dramatic with his acting chops than a lot of people tend to give him credit for, more known for his comedy. In terms of what didn't work for me, to quote a friend, this movie had rock for brains. Every time it thought about exploring an interesting idea about hero worship, or the disposable nature of black athletes in America by white owners, or the lengths people are willing to go for greatness, it would quickly pivot away from unpacking that and move on to the next moment that felt designed to shock more than actually reflect upon. I could have also used a lot more football from this movie. The scenes we do get with them on the actual practice field were far and away the most interesting bits. So who would I recommend Him to? Anyone that's okay with a movie heavy on the experimental and that prefers a vibe that's much more about style and minimal on the substance. I'm going to give this film an average score of 5.6 out of 10. The next movie I got to was called John Candy, I Like Me. This is an intimate documentary into the life of comedy legend John Candy. It was directed by Colin Hanks, produced by Ryan Reynolds, among others, and it's available in the United States right now on Prime Video. So what did I like about the film? Well, obviously the title of the movie. It's a great line from a great movie that perfectly encapsulates what this documentary is. I also really like the amount of archival footage Colin Hanks was able to get from Candy's personal life, from both family and friends. It's really remarkable. He also managed to pull in a who's who of famous faces to sit down and interview about their own relationships with John Candy. The stuff with Macaulay Culkin on film sets, and especially the stuff with Catherine O'Hara at John Candy's funeral, both hit with major emotional gut punches for me. And it was just magical reminiscing and seeing clips of all these moments from his career that were such a large part of my own childhood. As great as Belushi and Chris Farley were as comedians and actors, I think it's unfair sometimes that these three guys get lumped in together for being larger individuals that passed away at young ages. I find that John Candy had a much more sensitive soul that was on full display in this documentary. As far as what didn't work for me, I have no real nitpicks about the film at all, but I do take major issue with the way some of these interviewers back in the 1980s and 1990s treated John Candy when it came to his weight and his physical build. You could see the pain on his face when being forced publicly to answer those questions, and it really made him all the more sympathetic as a figure in hindsight. So who would I recommend this movie to? Documentary fans, and everyone that lived through the 80s and the 90s who were raised on the great movies of John Candy throughout his career like me will find a ton in this film. I'm giving it a great score of 8.6 out of 10. Up next, we have the film Caught Stealing, the latest movie from director Darren Aronofsky, who tends to stir up controversy with the subject matter and the style of most of his films. What did I like about the film? Austin Butler is a star, plain and simple. He steps up on my screen and I just get weak in the knees. It's going to be really hard for me to ever pass on watching Austin Butler in something, even if the material is less than great, which this is. As far as what didn't work for me, the movie felt nothing like the rest of the films in Aronofsky's filmography. Most of his work is heavy on the style and the editing, and it often comes with some strong, dark, melodramatic tones, even if it doesn't always pay off and often lacks subtlety. This movie, though, felt like it could have been made by literally anyone. I also found the plot to be without any interest, which I was worried about when I saw a trailer for it at the theater a while back, and it proved to be true. I also expected and I needed substantially more of Zoe Kravitz in the movie. As far as who would I recommend this film to, the Austin Butler adoring people out there, obviously, of which there are many, and I suppose anyone that wants to check off all the Aronofsky movies for completion's sake might as well give this a go. I'm going to give the film a 6.9 out of 10. Moving along, we get to a film called Splitsville. This is an offbeat romantic comedy, if you can call it that, by director Michael Angelo Covino. As far as what I liked about this film, finally we have a director in the last few years that understands how to accentuate what Dakota Johnson does well on camera while hiding some of the things she's not as effective in doing. Take note, other writers and directors, please. I also really appreciated the way this movie dealt with the messiness of relationships, especially of the open variety. I found myself chuckling quite a bit at the awkward predicaments Kyle Marvin's character kept ending up in throughout the film. In terms of what didn't work, I think the movie could have used Nicholas Braun a little bit better. He's way more funny and talented than he's shown and given the chance to flex in here. Just look at Succession if you need an example. And I could always use more Adria Arjona in films after being blown away with her talent and her beauty in Richard Linklater's Hitman a couple years ago. In terms of who I would recommend this movie to, rom-com fans that aren't afraid of something a little less cookie cutter and with a slightly sharper edge to it will have fun with Splitsville. I'm going to give this movie a really good score of 7.6 out of 10. Next up, we have the film Steve, a drama from director Tim Mylance, who has credits on the Netflix Peaky Blinders series, and here he reunites with actor Cillian Murphy, still fresh on the heels of his Best Actor win for Oppenheimer a couple years back. What did I like about the movie? I love that after winning what for most people is their greatest acting achievement, an Oscar, Cillian Murphy continued beating to his own path, and he made smaller, more character-driven films like this, and small things like these last year. This movie did a really nice job slow playing what was the heart of Steve's character's emotional turmoil and what was going on at the school he's teaching at, where they're being filmed for a day by a news crew. The young actors that all play the students are wonderful in the film as well. And it took me until nearly the end of the movie to realize one of the main women acting in the film is among my top musical artists of today, Little Simz. She has great acting chops to go with her singing and her rapping skills, a really versatile talent. And I'm a sucker for an ambiguous ending, and this one has it. I have talked to friends already who have seen the movie, and we all seem to be sort of on the same page with what happens to the Steve character at the end. However, I've heard there are other interpretations that I think are what make movies like this so great. In terms of what didn't really work, really just the Netflix effect of it all. There is a certain aesthetic look in the coloration of films and the way they present on screen that all movies by the streamer seem to fall under. I wouldn't say cheap is the right word, but it doesn't feel as lived in and real as other movies, and it's not easy to explain how or why that's the case, but it is noticeable after watching years and years of Netflix original content. I also could have used more Emily Watson. She was also with Cillian Murphy in Small Things Like These last year, and that film was much more kind to giving her a showcase to remind everyone why she's been great from the day she started acting back in 1996 with Breaking the Waves. In terms of who I would recommend this movie to, whoever has a Netflix account and wants to see what Cillian Murphy has up his sleeve after winning the Best Actor for Oppenheimer should check this movie out. I also expect this will connect really well with all the teachers of the world out there, and I'm going to give it a good score of 7.6 out of 10. The next movie I saw was also on Netflix called The Perfect Neighbor. This is a documentary streaming on Netflix, as I said, which is the best place out there for true crime content right now. In terms of what I liked about this film, the director and the editor expertly created a cohesive narrative using nothing but actual footage from either police body cams or news reports, or from cameras used inside police stations and courthouses. If you're not familiar with the facts of the story, this movie is methodical and deliberate in reaching its conclusion, and it literally waits till the end credits to finally show its hand, which left me on the absolute edge of my seat, hoping for justice and biting my nails. In terms of what didn't work, this really isn't a reflection on the movie because it was my own dumb fault for watching this when I did, but not knowing the true story or reading a synopsis beforehand, then putting my kids down to bed and watching this in the evening was a terrible decision. After a major moment happens around 45 to 50 minutes into the movie, both my wife and I, who were watching at the same time and laying in bed, started uncontrollably crying, and we had to physically stop the movie and walk away for a little bit. All I wanted to do at that point was go in my son's room, give them big hugs as a parent, because this is not an easy watch. However, in terms of recommending this, anyone and everyone with a Netflix account, any person that loves true crime, any fans of documentary features, this is a must-watch experience, and I'm going to give it an 8.7 out of 10. Moving right along, we go to a film called The Roses, a new rendition of a famous 1981 novel, The War of the Roses, this time written by Tony McNamara. In terms of what I liked about the movie, I'll preface by saying I've never read the book, and I have very little admiration for the 1989 film version directed by Danny DeVito. I am also probably higher than most people on the career of director Jay Roach. I think he's a pretty solid hand when it comes to the comedy world, so I'll just say I had a good enough time watching this movie. Benedict Cumberbatch and Olivia Colman can both easily bounce between comedy and drama with zero effort, and they carry this thing over the finish line with their natural charm and their skill. Andy Samberg, Kate McKinnon, and Allison Janney are all kind of shoehorned in for their own roles, but they're all reliable talents like our leads, so I don't have anything really to complain about from the acting in any department. In terms of what didn't work, because I have no attachment to the source material, the whole movie kind of is a take it or leave it experience for me. It was fun while it was on, but it's not something I'm really ever going to think about again after talking about it here. In terms of who I'm going to recommend this movie to, someone that loves the work of Olivia Colman or Benedict Cumberbatch, anyone that just wants a breezy bit of escapism, and someone that can go into this with low expectations and zero reverence for either the novel or the 80s film will probably have a good time. I'm going to give the film a 7 out of 10. Up next, we have Spinal Tap 2: The End Continues. This is the sequel to the legendary 1984 rockumentary, which was directed by Rob Reiner, and it starred Michael McKean, Christopher Guest, and Harry Shearer, and that movie went all the way up to 11 Once Upon a Time. This film follows the band's reunion to play one final concert 40 years later. In terms of what I liked about the movie, seeing this collection of talent back together brought back the warm fuzzies for me. I love all the Christopher Guest movies, I'm a huge Rob Reiner fan, and Spinal Tap's one of my favorite comedies ever. And I like that, unlike the abomination that was Hulu's History of the World TV series a couple of years ago, which was much more about other comedians pitching ideas to Mel Brooks, this at least felt like the OG crew making it the way they wanted to, and because of that, it at least felt authentic to their comedy style. In terms of what didn't work, it's not a huge stretch to say that it felt more tired and less inspired than the original. It wasn't bad, but I was rarely motivated to laugh out loud at any of the bits. And most of the actual musicians brought in for cameos offered next to nothing for humor or story. Elton John is not particularly a great actor, and Paul McCartney, who normally exudes natural charisma and charm, got very little to do here. In terms of a recommendation for this movie, if you're someone that saw Spinal Tap in the 80s when it came out, and you want to see what these guys are up to in their senior years, there are plenty of worse ways you could spend 85 minutes of your time. I'm going to give this film a score of 6.5 out of 10. And before the movie came out, I did a Rob Reiner director ranking of my top 10 films from the man. This doesn't quite sneak into that top 10, but it still leaps and bounds above North, and for that, I'm grateful. Moving along, we have the film The Long Walk, an adaptation of a 1979 Stephen King novel, which was under his Richard Bachman pseudonym, which usually means it's the most dark of his subject matter. What I liked about this movie, I thought Francis Lawrence of the Hunger Games fame was a really excellent choice to handle what is the subject here. I liked the screenplay, which was written by J.T. Molnar, and both Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson are excellent young actors that we can get used to seeing regularly. They have great chemistry and you believe in their bond right from the get-go. And Mark Hamill is having the most fun in the villain role, something he seems to embrace after his unreal success as the longtime voice of the Joker in the Batman animated universe. The violence in the film is also brutal, and it comes about so abruptly that you have to stay locked in at every second. When it comes to what didn't work, it is such a bleak story, much like the other King film adaptation, The Mist, that I'll be hard-pressed to want to go back and watch this with any regularity. I also found the color palette just a bit dull, which I understand, but it also makes the film even more dour. And as far as the music score of the movie, it's okay, but it doesn't add much to the overall project. Who would I recommend this movie to? If you've been a lifelong lover of Stephen King's work, both in written form and what people have done in movies, there's no reason not to seek this out. If you want to see two emerging young acting talents continue their ascension, this is also a great showcase for both of those young men. I'm going to give The Long Walk a score of 7.7 out of 10. The next film I watched was Anemone, the directorial debut from Ronan Day-Lewis, son of director Rebecca Miller and actor Daniel Day-Lewis, and he managed to talk his dad out of retirement for this story. As far as what I liked, the movie looks pretty good and it captures the English countryside really well. Kudos go out to cinematographer Ben Fordsman. And I'm so happy to see Daniel Day-Lewis finding the inspiration to create more art. That can only be a good thing in the long run. I also think Samantha Morton, in a very limited on-screen role, is really, really good. But when it comes to what didn't work for me, the actual movie. Narratively, it was disjointed, it was incoherent, it was a total mess. The movie starts really slowly and methodically, and if you're not careful, it might just lull you into a complete nap. By the time we get to the more emotional point in the film, it's really hard to say if it feels earned given the vapid nature of the story through the first hour and change. For me, this is much more like Nine in Daniel Day-Lewis's acting filmography than his top-end work like Lincoln or Phantom Thread or There Will Be Blood. When it comes to who would I actually recommend Anemone to, I have a hard time thinking of anyone, even the most loyal Daniel Day-Lewis fans like myself. You can tell he really wanted to help his son with his film debut, and that's admirable, but the movie itself is just bang on average. I'm going to give it a 5.5 out of 10. I also want to highlight an upcoming podcast guest spot that I have over at Stone's Top 10s in mid-November. I joined Anna Stone and we talked about Disney's Pocahontas. For those that don't follow Stone's Top 10s, Anna is doing a season built around Disney animated classics, and she was kind enough to invite me on for this movie. And unlike most of the guest spots that I have done over the last couple of years, where I'm usually well acquainted with those movies, this was a nice deviation because I don't think I've sat down to watch Pocahontas since the late 90s when my sister would occasionally put it on in the house. We broke down the way the film hit back in 1995, how it's held up today, and some fun things like who we'd cast today if this film was turned into a live-action movie, which Disney is always want to do. That episode should be up very, very soon, so please make sure you follow Stone's Top 10s using the link in this episode. And I got a little bit of television in during October, something that's harder for me to find the time for considering how many movies that are on my watch list I'm having to get to each and every month. My sons are now of an age where I felt like I could introduce them to Stranger Things as an entry into the next level of spooky, scary stuff. Between the 5th and final season starting up in late November, and it having been a number of years since I revisited season 4, I also selfishly wanted to go back through the series to remind myself where the characters were before getting thrown into the deep end when season 5 arrives. Much to my happiness, we flew through the first 4 seasons in about 2 weeks, and neither child has had a single nightmare from any of the frightening monsters in the Upside Down, knock on wood. The opposite actually happened, and now they're both completely obsessed with our house decked out in Stranger Things everything, and we even recently attended a Halloween trunk or treat, and we tricked out our car with Eggos, Demogorgons, the works. After going back and watching what we have so far on Netflix through 4 seasons, my feelings haven't really changed any. I think seasons 1 and 2 are both great. They're tremendous pieces of television, but seasons 3 and 4 are too spread out with the characters all over the map, though there are some bright spots like Eddie in season 4 and the arrival of Billy and Max in seasons 2 and 3. I do have to laugh, though, that after watching the season 5 trailer with my boys, because all the main characters are now so tall and mature, that they're really not very believable as teenagers, much like 90s high school shows like Saved by the Bell. And I will make sure to review the final season as it drops at the end of November and then the end of December, since they're splitting up the release over 5 episodes across 3 different dates. And finally, since it's October, I did get through my fair share of Halloween movies, even if I took it much easier than I have over the last 2 years, really for my own sanity. Where I would previously challenge myself to watch 100 movies during spooky season, and I would cover every decade, every major subgenre, this time I didn't put any restrictions on myself, and I just watched what I could, when I could, and a lot of it was with my kids when I was able to. In totality, I still managed to watch over 50 movies, and I'll quickly highlight a few of the really good and the really bad standouts. In terms of the really good, I went back and I revisited 2 2019 films for podcast prep, Saint Maud and Dr. Sleep. If you have not seen either of those movies and you're a horror fan, check them out. I also had a really good time with a couple of 2025 releases. The first one being VHS Halloween, which is now an annual thing that we get a VHS movie every year. Shudder does a great job. The segments were a little uneven, but on the whole, I always have a good time checking out the VHS series. And I watched Good Boy over the weekend with my kids, my wife, and my dog. We all had a really fun time. I think the lead dog actor in the film, Indy, deserves all the recognition, all the kudos, all the awards. It was a fun movie. The premise was pretty thin, obviously, since you're in the POV of a dog. But for about an 85-minute experience, it was a good time. As far as the bad standouts, I watched a movie on Prime Video called Trust with Sophie Turner. Absolute crap. Avoided it if all possible. And then I revisited Hubie Halloween from 2020. I know some people really like this Adam Sandler movie, but it's not for me. And I even watched it at my barber getting a haircut a couple of weeks back. I was in a group setting. It just wasn't my thing. So there we go. Do you agree with any of my reviews, or have I been way out of line with some of the scores and the feedback I've given? Feel free to DM me on any of the social media pages at the handle RevAlmanac, or you can email directly into the show at revisionistalmanac@yahoo.com and leave me all your thoughts. And at the time of this recording on November 1st, a new episode of the regular monthly revised Oscars is only a few days away. I was joined by 2 first-time guests, but voices that have featured on the Rev Almanac channel before. Jen and Sarah from Movies and Us. And we look back on the 2003 year in film and the Academy Awards ceremony that saw The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King win Best Picture. Did the 3 of us agree with any of the winners that year, which included Peter Jackson, Sean Penn, and Charlize Theron? You will just have to tune into that episode and find out. That is now going to wrap up my October watches. I hope you had a little bit of fun listening to this, and be on the lookout for more of this series at the start of each new month. I'm Andrew. I can't wait to see you next time.